Well, it's 6:59, close enough, eh? Go ahead and start. Thanks everybody for being here. You know me, I always like to start, what, does anybody else have a reflection for tonight? To jump in. Stacy, you often do.
No, I'm having a good one. Been beautiful. October is like my favorite month with all the leaves changing and the weather getting a little cooler. I had a really fun time at the farmer's market when we were doing stuff.
Oh, yes, yeah, and we'll talk about that a little later, I think.
I've actually had to drive over to Bellevue a couple of times this week. It's such a beautiful drive right now. There's so many maples along the road that are turning
Oh, yeah.
wonderful colors and scents. Almost makes the drive pleasant. No.
Well, that's not enough reflection. Here's a quote from Thoreau. You know, you're always in good shape if you can quote Thoreau, I think, in a meeting. So this is, I frequently tramped. No, I forget that one. That's the one. Here's it. Very good. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Well, let's just sink in a little bit. We won't try to eat it to death or anything. Okay, thank you all. Next, we're going to turn to introductions, which we have some cool introductions tonight. And we'll save Sam for last. So, but we will introduce ourselves. I'm going to start with Stacy.
The tree board. I've been on the tree board. Closing in on 2 years. I joined with Victoria. And I've lived in Lake Forest Park since 2018. So.
Good.
I'm Victoria Kuka. I've been on tree board for 2 years. I'm currently the vice chair. I've been in Lake Forest Park for 10 years.
Richard Saunders, we met with Sam. Been on the tree board for 1 year, longtime Lake Forest Park resident, and that's welcome to the city. You know, Doug Sprugel, I've been in the tree board for 4 years. I've been at Lake Forest Park for 10 years.
And Mark Phillips, I'm currently the chair of the tree board and coming up on 3 years. So the end of my first term. So, so good. Yeah, Larry, go ahead.
Yep, I'm Larry Golden. I'm on the city council. I'm the liaison to the tree board. I've been the liaison for the past 3.5 years at this point. Same time I've been on the council.
Okay, skip Sam for the
My name's Elizabeth, assistant planner for the city of Lake Forest Park.
Thank you. Mark, what about you? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Sam. I'm your coworker and direct supervisor. Glad to meet you. Welcome to Tree Board.
Thank you.
Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director for the video. Thank you.
Thanks. And Richard. Okay.
I'm Dick Olmsted. I'm the senior tree board member. I guess so. I'm
Yes, you
just
are.
getting off in February. Retired UW professional.
Very good. Thank you. We have 2 visitors tonight. Please introduce yourselves as well.
My name is Sarah Phillips. I'm with the Lake Forest Park Plant Hub.
I'm Janelle Lowen, environmental artist. I live in Bothell, and I'm going to try to help Bothell out.
Janelle painted those tree paintings that some of us saw the other night at the Red Sky Gallery. We're back there. Was there anybody else online? I don't think so. Right? Okay. Well, good. And now Sam. Sam.
Good evening,
Cull.
everybody. My name is Sam Cull. I'm the urban forest planner for Lake Forest Park. Started the position about, say, a little over a month now. I've been really enjoying it, and I'm excited to be here. I don't know, I'll give you a little bit of history about my arboriculture knowledge. I've lived in Seattle for the past 5 years, and I worked for Puget Sound Energy as an arborist for them, specifically utility vegetation. Prior to that, I'm from Illinois, I'm in Chicago, and I worked for the Chicago Park District, forest preserves of DuPage County, and their utility services out there, Commonwealth Edison, all as arborists or like natural areas workers. So, great.
Anything else folks would like to ask? Sam, we're not gonna drill in too much here, but any other question you'd like to say?
What drew you to Lake Forest Park?
Well, I really love the idea of tree cities, and I know of a few in the area, and so I wanted to find a position that challenged me more arboriculture. I think falling with utility vegetation doesn't necessarily call too much for, you know, identifying trees or diagnosing, kind of going through like the process for tree risk assessment, and I wanted to find something that challenged me a little bit more in that realm.
Well, good, thank you. And we're really pleased that you're here. Yeah, glad to be here. On this job and working with us. So I understand there's maybe a change off that take place in terms of our staff liaison in the future.
Yeah, so I'm currently showing Sam how to run like the Zoom side of it, minutes and all that, and then they'll eventually transfer over to Sam.
Okay.
Once he's comfortable and ready.
Great.
Well, you also come and see us once in a while.
Yeah, I'll pop in here and there.
All right, thank you very much. We have the agenda for tonight in front of us. Any thoughts, comments, questions about that agenda, or is there a motion to approve?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Sorry, Mark, I just have one.
Yes, sir.
Comment. We haven't debriefed about the picnic in the park, have we?
The C under old business is recapping previous, it says farmers
Oh, there it
market,
is.
but recapping all of we've done a budget outreach over the last 2 months and then talk about future outreach.
So we'll cover it. Thank you.
Good reminder about that. I almost forgot. about that. All right, I have a motion to approve, and there was a second. Second over there. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We have minutes as well from our last meeting. Folks had a chance to look at that at all? I didn't see anything myself. Is there any comments on the agenda? Fair representation of our work. Is there a motion to approve that time, the minutes? I'm sorry. And second, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, we're at the point of public comments, and I know we have at least one public comment tonight, because she was telling me about it over dinner. Sarah.
Hello, my name is Sarah Phillips. I am also on the Climate Action Committee. And part of what we did in the Climate Action Committee was authorize the development of the Lake Forest Park Climate Hub. Many of you may know that we opened it on Sunday to our official grand opening of the Climate Hub. There are a couple of, and the purpose of the Climate Hub was to create there's a big mural, and in the middle there's a bulletin board to give people an opportunity to interact with issues around climate. We also had in our imagination what we're calling phase 2. And phase 2 was to create interactive story maps about local science. And we got a grant of scientists from the American Geophysical Union's program called the Thriving Earth Exchange. And what they give you is scientists and some coaching and guiding about how you move on the project. So there were a couple of things that came together, this notion of this project that we could do. And then we went to Kenmore's, the hangar. Have anybody been to the hangar? They have a touchscreen TV, which is PORING stuff. And we thought you could take a touchscreen TV and you could put that in a public space like the hangar. Well, in our case, it would be the Commons, and you could visualize local science. That we have an extraordinary amount of local science in Lake Forest Park. The stream keepers have been collecting data for 30 years. It turns out the birds in Lake Forest Park have gone to Lion Creek. What's the one next to Lion Creek? Civic Club, and they look at the water for 5 minutes and count birds, and then they look someplace else, but not the water, and count birds. And they've been doing that for 40 years. And they've been inputting that data into the Cornell bird, eBird thing. And it turns out that you can extract that data out. So we would be able to see some issue, bird things. So the scientists we asked for were people who could do GIS and do story mapping through SFI, the mapping program. And what they do is visualize this data. And then we thought, we don't know if this can happen. That's a grand idea. So you'd be able to see streams on a tab, and you'd be able to see birds on a tab, and you'd be able to see fish on a tab. And we also think you should be able to see canopy on a tab. And I know that you all are beginning to do some work, some additional work on Lake Forest Park's tree canopy. And I just wanted to say that as you're thinking about that, we would like to sort of just put this out there, that it's an opportunity to work, to visualize the data on a map that is in the public arena. So people could, the notion is that people could come up and play with science. Look at, and you could imagine they could say what were the historic trees, what are the current trees, what trees are dying, what trees are thriving. But I don't know that. I don't know exactly what it is. So we have the scientists. We got Councilmember Dembowski gave us a grant so we can buy this touchscreen TV. And we have scientists, and now we're looking for data. I mean, I'm not the person who can figure out how to make these maps, but these two scientists that we have working on the project have done that in the past and are working with us as volunteers to do it. So I just wanted to make sure that as you're thinking about this new canopy thing, that we're able to be in that mix to help the public visualize the data in a way that's open and accessible. So that's all.
What is the timeline for the work that you're doing in partnership with the scientists, the folks who are doing the mapping?
18 months, and we're about 2 months in. So,
So they don't need like data from us like next.
oh, no, I'm thinking you're exploring and we're exploring, but it seemed like it was important to say that this was a project that at the ground level, there seemed like there were opportunities to collaborate. And then you make the data that you're finding accessible, interesting to the public. And that's what we really want to do, is make this science, I don't know if you're allowed to say playful, but fun and engaging. And that at each intersection, what we also want to do is talk about how people can get engaged in one of these projects.
So where are the scientists from?
They're actually from around here. One is they're both from Seattle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Through the UW or just the?
They both came through us through UW. One is already employed, and one just finished a program in mapping.
Who's the one who's employed?
I'm sorry, what?
Who is the one who's employed?
Her name is Erica. I forget her last name, but I'm happy to tell you.
She about 45?
Yeah, no,
It feels like a game we should.
That'll be fine.
Faculty.
no, she's not
Just
faculty.
has a job.
No, she worked in oceanography, and she worked in and in some climate issues.
We'll track it down.
Yeah, we'll try it out. Don't give me his last name. I'm a person.
Okay,
All
thank you
right,
very much.
okay.
I
thanks.
assume we'll probably likely be working with you on into the future as we refine our data and give more data. You understand your needs more.
Yeah, I love the idea.
Yeah,
Ditto.
yeah. Thank you. Well, Janelle, would you want to make a comment to the board and all?
No.
What are you doing here?
So today I read that the city of Bothell is planning organizing a sort of a committee to look into tree canopy count and, you know, to, the anxiety of climate change and the anxiety over, you know, that whole thing is getting to everybody, and I love this idea because I think the mission statement is about that, right? We're really getting to a desperate point. And the youth is suffering, and the oxygen and the temperature of the earth is going up and all that, right? I think Bothell's been lagging behind Lake Forest Park for many years in trying to address tree canopy, and let's just do that one. And so they're starting to look into something that I didn't know about. I wanted to come here and visit this meeting because I have to start somewhere. And so started somewhere.
Well, thank you. Glad you're here. All right, we're already at item 7, folks. Look at that. Reports and announcements. We have some things that are gonna sound like reports as we get into the rest of our agenda, but I don't know if there are others. We're gonna talk about SFI and we're gonna talk about KCD and things, but often Councilmember Goldman has something along those lines.
I don't have much of an update, in terms of what council's been working on, really between now and the end of the year. The two big things, I think I've already mentioned the climate element. That is just about done with planning commission, and so Director Hoffman's gonna be bringing that to council. I believe a week from tomorrow, that'll be council's first look at the climate element. The other big thing we're gonna be working on is the biennial budget adjustment. So the city adopts a budget every 2 years. And then the other year, we just sort of make adjustments on the fly as needed based on, you know, what have our actual revenues and expenditures been. Looking ahead to 2026, I would imagine we'll be getting an update from our new urban forest planner and Director Hoffman about the tree code, the proposed amendments to the tree code that you've adopted. Updates from them about when that'll be coming to council, but I don't have a more specific update on that yet.
And I think last time we discussed it, we were targeting maybe January.
I'll defer that to city staff in terms of what the best timing is.
All right, thank you. All right, on our agenda next are a series of topics that I think are kind of important to us. The first one is the SFI grant status. And I believe that either Mr. Hoffman or Mr. Cole are going to lead us through. Mark, I did share the 2-pager that was sent out to me, the description of scope with the other tree board members, so we've had a chance to look at that a bit.
Thank you.
But I wouldn't assume that we understand it or know it or have our comments ready.
No, that's fine. A little background, since September and October, we've been working on a grant agreement that went through legal review in October. While that was happening, we sent a letter of interest to SFI. That's kind of a placekeeper. We are interested. We're pursuing it. That buys us time. Legal reviewed it. We have a series of 30 or 40 comments. I sat with Mike Martini of SFI, reviewed them all. He is going to produce a final draft agreement, and we're bringing that to council. The one thing he and I couldn't discuss was a scope of work. What are we doing? The legal review cited that as, for a variety of reasons, an issue that needs to be addressed before we go forward. What are the steps? So we had the budget, we had the total amount. This 2-page document intends to be that scope of work, which would be inserted as Exhibit A, and we would go forward. And we anticipated that at the point that we had the written scope of work, the tree board would bless it. It's primarily the audit. It's primarily the SFI work. We have agreed we are not going towards certification. We are including the audit and steps that are productive for a beginning effort to update our forest management plan. So we believe this scope of work does that. We're not spending the $5,000 on certification under SFI. That's fine. Mike Martini's been very flexible. our work, and they're not subject to the federal shutdown. We can't read the future. This is a reimbursement agreement. We don't want to be stuck with a budget hole next year or stuck in a position where other priority work from the council can't be done. And so we imagine the scope of work is pretty important before the council considers it. Sam created this with documentation from the previous urban forest planner. I'm okay with it. I've reviewed it. I have no issues, and I'll let Sam kind of handle this discussion and review, hoping that tree board blesses it. We have time, but if we emerge tonight feeling like these are the individual steps delineated between staff and the consultant, we have what it takes to produce a next version draft agreement and bring that to city council.
One question, I think, and just answered before, but just make absolutely sure I understand it. We can't actually use this money to go out and do anything with our trees. We can't map trees or do inventories or anything like that.
Correct.
Sam, was there anything else you wanted to say about this, these 2 pages, scope of work, or do you want to just continue with people asking questions? How do we put it on the screen?
Is that a possibility?
Or on the screen should be?
So if not, I can kind of just go through the different points. There are 6 of them or 5. 5 different steps for like the scope of work that's planned for this.
Well, let's see, hold on a minute, Sam.
Yeah, let's see if we can
Maybe
work
we
with
should get it
community.
up on.
Wonder if the easiest way, since Director Hoffman is already on Zoom, if he could share his screen with the scope of work pulled up. That might-
I'm a bit old fashioned. I have paper.
Yeah, you just hold that.
Yeah, I hate to admit it. I printed this. I'm sorry.
It'd be helpful if you guys.
Excellent.
We
have- No, it's
You
just-
got it there. Okay, we're good, we think. We all have it in front of us one way or the other, I believe. All right. Go ahead, Sam.
So just kind of going through it, I just tried to really describe the work that was going to be done through the steps and the processes with SFI, understanding that right off the bat, they're going to need all the relevant data that we have, and just tried listing all of the different resources possible to help them gather and identify and be able to provide these details moving forward past step 1. Some of those, like a urban forest management plan, municipal code, comprehensive plan, the park, open space plan, and the 2 other iTree and the legacy 100 years, just all public documents that will probably help whoever comes in as the consultants come in to take a look at this, to be able to provide and give us more detail. So moving forward after that, they review these and they go through and provide like a gap and a benchmark for where we're at, and providing kind of a game plan to how and what we need to do to move into more of the following, like the 15 SFI breakdowns and what they use to gauge and grade all of the cities that go through this process. So taking all the reviews, finding an analysis for it, and kind of like benchmarking where we're at, and then going through and having an open communication with different community stakeholders to be able to provide more detail and just to acquire more information through these processes of interviews. And following that, at stage 4 here, just kind of going through it, then becomes more of like the action plans on what needs to be changed, through whether it's the municipal code that we have, the urban forestry management plans that we have, and providing different policy and program adjustments to fit the SFI objectives that are provided. And then the final report usually will be addressed to everybody in the tree board, council, and here, and within city staff as well. So those are about the 5 steps that I broke it down into for this scope of work.
Pretty basic project management kind of
Yeah,
outline, isn't it?
exactly.
What's the significance of
Hmm?
red versus black?
The red is stuff that I found relevant for this meeting specifically.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I need to put in the scope of work to, when we send it over for legals, being like, look at all of these, I'd rather leave it more open, like use any resource that's applicable, not so much. These are just examples to everybody. Yeah.
On that small point, the actual document that the city has is called the community forest man. Not the.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good catch.
I should probably know this because it's a term I've seen before. But what's a gap analysis in this context?
Kind of taking where we are to where we want to be. And that's, they're trying to fill, like, find the gap in what we're missing, so we fit those objectives.
It would be based heavily on the 15 what they call it, goals or objectives. or
I think they're just
categories.
yeah, the SFI objectives.
Yeah,
I have somewhere, not with me right now, a breakdown, kind of going through all of it.
how do we compare with those? Yeah,
Last year.
Yeah,
yeah. So SFI is the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, an organization that managing grants for this grant with the US Forest Service. Any other thoughts or comments?
I have a couple of minor ones. I think maybe you should spell out some of these acronyms, cross, SWAT. Project SWAT,
okay.
and it would be nice to spell tree board, right?
Wait a minute, where's that? Where?
Red.
Right, red,
The second,
tree or red.
Yeah.
Good thing it's red. We're gonna omit
Remember the
that.
tree board, and
Okay.
And I just wanted to say, I think the fact that we're doing this community, or supposed to do, well, doing this community and stakeholder engagement is a really good thing, because we had talked about the community forest management plan, but no place we had talked about it yet, and we talked much about finding out anybody else in the city. Months from the city forest management, we think we know that we're supposed to represent the city, but asking people, yeah, there's a lot to be said for it.
Got a couple of thoughts. One, in response to what you mentioned, Mark, with not currently impacted by government shutdown, but you never know what tomorrow holds. I assume any agreement or contract we may have with whoever ends up doing this body of work will include a and at any point, if funding disappears, we will be terminating this contract and you will deliver us whatever you have on the day it is terminated.
Yes, Kim reviewed all those provisions. We will get notice. It's short. In short, if they notify us that that's the case, we have 7 days to spin around, tell the
Okay.
consultant, stop work.
Okay.
But we will be reimbursed. We will be able to pay for the portion of work already done.
Okay, great. One of the other things, if I remember correctly from the write-ups from Drew and from meeting with Mike, that Mike Martini,
Mhm.
was that part of her original budget write-up was including some work that she was qualified to do and would do, and the grant would be paying for a portion of her salary. Am I correct that the way it is currently written up, it would be exclusively contractor hours?
No, roughly 20,000 and 40,000.
Okay,
Yeah. And so tonight is blessing the scope of work, because tomorrow I sit with Sam and say, for that portion of 20,000, can you perform this?
yeah, I was just trying to, the way this was written, it sounded like I couldn't tell if everything here was scope of work for the contractor or scope of work for the project as a whole.
Yeah.
So, just wanted to clarify that.
When this comes to the RFP, imagine that 70,000 will be 45,000 or thereabouts.
Correct. Yeah.
But
And we have a list of qualified consultants in anticipation that somebody on there can do it for that amount.
Excellent. The only other thing, I love that they're including, that it includes the community engagement stuff, and my experience from our other projects we have done in my time on tree board is it has been hard to find people to engage. And it ends up coming back to us to figure out who those people are. So we should be prepared to figure out who are those community stakeholders, how are we recruiting for those things? Because while it sounds lovely, a couple times now, I feel like we have gotten to the point in projects, I know at Tripoint with the CPAT group, there was a lot of back and forth of yes, you should talk to people, and the contractors kept coming back to us and being like, who should we talk to? And we're like, the people in this room already. So I just want to make sure that's on our radar, that we need to be prepared to figure out, to help recruit for that and figure out who those people are gonna be.
I was assuming they would have some kind of open meetings like they had for the waterfront plan, but it may not draw people with the waterfront plan, just.
That's, yep.
That's a good point.
What I hear you saying, we may want to prime the pump a bit for those public meetings. In terms of
Starting to think
get the word
about
out about it.
what strategies have been helpful for public meetings for non-hot topic issues? And are there other groups or folks that would be helpful to have engaged?
Any other thoughts, comments? I have one I'd like to share. It's really in point number 2, the gap analysis and defense. I'm wondering if there's 2 things mentioned there. The first bullet is kind of the meat of the heart of the thing in terms of conducting that analysis of where we are vis-a-vis the 15 points. But then the second bullet talks about an SFI self-assessment tool or equivalent, and I'm not familiar with. Is that you think is that something else? Is that a different tool, or is that another reference to the main analysis?
I view it as self being the city and or consultant that we bring on board.
And I would assume that's a prerequisite for figuring out the gap analysis, because you need to know where you stand to figure
Exactly.
out that.
Yeah. So you could change the order here, but the idea is reviewing what we have, using that tool, using staff and a consultant, coming up with an analysis and a report of what's missing.
I just a thought, you might think about if that's really the same thing, then it might be that the first 2 bullets get combined somehow, and I may not know enough about it to make that a real recommendation, but maybe give that some thought, whether those are really getting at the same thing or not. It just could be combined and simplified.
It looks to me like the second and third bullet points are the 2 steps required to complete the
that's
first bullet point.
Maybe that's kind of where it's going. Yep.
One is self-assessment, the second is identify the gaps, and that's what a gap analysis requires.
Kind of looks like that might be it. Good. Any other thoughts or comments to pass on to Mark or Sam? I had just one other thought. You and I had talked a little bit, Mark, about if we take personnel time out of that 70,000, it kind of gets down to a smaller amount, obviously. Whether that turns out to be enough money to interest a contractor in doing this work. And I think that's maybe a consideration aside from this document, which needs to go forward for the SFI part of it. But there may come a point at which we would maybe consider tree fund money to augment that, a small amount that might make a difference in terms of being able to find a qualified consultant to do the work.
Yeah.
So
The expectation is we wouldn't need that. If that moment in time came, we would explore it. And the assurance is when we first started this with Drew, our grant request is going to be $20,000 something. This has federal reporting, lots of in-house work. We generally don't pursue federal level grants for less than 6 figures because of that. When that discussion came up, they came forward, offered to raise it to 70,000 something to add the consultant. So my belief is those 2 elements together make up the total grant request now. And because of that conversation, we're relying on that list of consultants can do it for the 40,000, right? That more or less was offered or given to us by SFI, who are very flexible, but are very knowledgeable about this process. So it could be wrong. We could approach that moment and we would have to revisit, because after council signs off on this grant agreement, we immediately go into that list and consulting, and we'll find out very quickly.
Okay. Yeah.
Just as a comment in that direction, the iTree ecosystem analysis for it, I think cost about $70,000 for all said and done. And actually, I think it was even less than that. And that was a lot of field work, a lot of writing up, a lot of analysis. So
So you think it's a reasonable ballpark?
Yeah, I think, if you can do all, but that's the kind of work I've done they've done in the past, I don't know how much work it is. If you can get somebody to do that much work for 60 to 70,000. Should be able to get somebody to do this much work for 60 to 70,000 or 50.
Yeah, the audit part and what we're using as a tool already exists.
Right.
Yep.
And again, the reason this is really important to us is that it really is a big piece of a community forest management plan that we would like to see happen, and this seems to be a good framework to work with. If we didn't have this framework, we'd have to invent one or find some other one to use. So this seems to be a good way to go. Any other thoughts on the scope of work? Comments? Well,
See it move forward.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, yes, Larry.
So jumping off of what we were just talking about, should federal reporting be an explicit bullet point on the scope of work, or is it independent of the scope?
It's not in the scope, it's in the 10 or 15 pages of the agreement in many places. There's 3 types. There's monthly, quarterly, and annual. The monthly goes to SFI and it's more or less an email. That's what makes this palatable. Otherwise, I would not be in support of doing this. The reporting takes longer than the actual work. The quarterly would be done by the consultant who would be familiar, and I don't anticipate much annual work because we would get this done and just do a final update. So normally we would be afraid of that reporting and involving the finance department. In this case, I think we are comfortable with the level we need.
And so you indicated at the beginning that with this piece in place, that it looks like that it's ready to go forward, that other questions have been addressed or resolved.
It is. Our next step is to sit with Mike Martini and get a next generation version of the draft agreement. We don't have it because he wants to keep control over it. He's extremely flexible. He may not be there a year from now. So that's why we're going through this effort. He already knows and is verbally accepting of Kim's comments. We will add this scope of work to that. He will email us a new version. We will put that on the next opportunity at City Council, probably take 2 touches, and we'll request waiving of a 3rd reading. I believe the support is there, but we are just being thorough with the agreement to be proactive for what may or may not happen next year.
Do you need any further formal adoption or anything of this from us tonight to move forward?
I'm pretty flexible. I would recommend a motion and recording it for the video just to be thorough.
So we need a motion regarding the scope of work for the SFI grant application.
What are we saying exactly?
I mean, the motion would be
I'm
to
sensing.
adopt the scope of work as presented.
Yeah, we're saying we think that
I-
this is accurate.
Endorse, right?
Endorse, yeah.
I sense that there's a consensus among us that this is on target for.
Yeah, the only reason I'm asking, Mark, is that we're not gonna be managing, we don't sign the SOW, we're not managing it, so I like the endorsement sounds of.
I move we endorse the scope of work for the SFI.
Is there a second? Doug, the seconds. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, well, great. Mark, thank you for jumping into this. I know it's been a lot of detailed stuff the last couple of weeks for you and Sam, but thank you for moving this through.
And it's because of the support. Normally, I would say we don't have the bandwidth for this, but because of tree board support, I think it's important to do.
I think as we move into the project, we'll find that there are ways that the tree board can continue to be supportive as well. Maybe in some of those public outreach sessions or other ways. It sounded like the consultant is going to be interviewing us or talking to us in different ways. So great. Thank you. Next order of business is our King Conservation District grant, the status on that. Yeah, I may have the latest word on that. I think I forwarded it to you. I got a notice from Ellen Arnstein at KCD today that she's that the KCD board has approved our application for the grant. to use $4,500 of our already accumulated jurisdictional funds with KCD for that purpose. Any other thoughts or questions or comments? Or
you say again, they approved what? They approved that we could use the money in a particular way.
well, you probably have to ask Ellen how that works. I imagine the KCD holds that money in some way and to release 4,500.
We had to tell them what we
Any amount.
wanted for the scope, and then their board had to approve it and then send it back to the city for our mayor.
And remind me what we requested for the 45.
So they're doing the standard geographies on the map system, plus individual parcels, land use zones, and wetlands. That was the ridiculous conversation we ended up on the way forward with Councilmember Goldman, getting us to the end of last time.
This is all about canopy analysis, canopy coverage analysis.
Awesome.
It's the new mapping tool set up through KP to be able to get us access to that.
And it will presumably be what will produce the kind of maps that you all talk.
Yeah.
Terrible.
We need a quick reminder that those 5 standard geographies, you have them, Victoria?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I do. One is census tracts, of which there are, I don't know, several in Lake Forest Park, big chunks though. And then census blocks, or maybe census blocks is a larger chunk, I guess. The census tracts maybe actually a smaller unit. Wetlands, and in this case, according to Ellen, the wetland geography may not be all that helpful to us because our whole city may be in one wetland. The way it's set up. And then there's something called a hexagon, which we saw a little bit, we were looking at together. It's kind of a pretty small piece of geography. Several parcels together that look pretty promising to me. And then the last one, which would be probably not helpful at all, is zip code.
Wait, individual parcels.
Yeah.
And then we ask for 3 custom. We get two customary custom geographies and one at an additional cost of $500. So individual parcels was one. Our land use zones was another. And then wetlands is the last one that we asked for, and this would be wetlands different than the one that's part of the standard, so. And by wetlands, I think we meant mainly our streams, I believe, our 2 stream systems in Lake Forest Park.
There are other pockets. There are other pockets, and we refer to the King County latest data.
Yeah.
Even that is a guide and insufficient. So my hope is that through this, we have access to other wetland data that property owners and applicants can use to do site-specific analysis before they submit building permits.
Yeah, so it might be helpful that way. Richard.
I think I got Victoria answered it. I think the first option you were talking about, watershed.
Oh, maybe, was it watershed?
I think so.
I thought it was.
That would
wetland.
make sense, right? Because watersheds be huge.
You're right,
So
you're right, watershed. Good. Which, yeah. Well, the question I think we have at this point is that all those 3 customs that we wanted, we have to provide GIS data for. And I'm not a GIS person. I don't know even what that means. It has to do with the way mapping data is stored and into database format for accessibility, but
They were all ones that we selected because they were linked from the LFP website. So presumably that is something that we need to send them a link and say, these are the ones we want. Is this what you need? And if they say no, then we need to figure it out from there.
yeah, I think some of those that we have on our website are just maps. But we need to find that out without any, without the GIS data behind them. But
Each one of those has a shapefile. One of Drew's many hobbies was diving into GIS, Geographic Information Systems. She has access to the shapefiles. The city does not have a GIS person. We have a resource that's primarily tasked with public works. We're hoping to beg for a couple hours of that resource to fix this issue.
Yeah.
The data and the shape files exist.
Well, I imagine the wetlands is gonna be the toughest one there, just because the irregularity of the data that, or the space that it occupies. Land use zones is probably something that would be fairly easy to get a hold of or figure out if we don't have that data. Individual parcels, we're told that we could probably approach King County. That's might be a link with King County to access their parcel information, which is pretty extensive, of course.
We
So
just
anyway-
signed an agreement with King County GIS with our new planning software, and we're gonna get that information for whatever we need it for quarterly.
Excellent, okay. Any other thoughts? So I think we're kind of looking at part of your job description for the next couple of quarters,
Seems like that.
or whatever it takes, probably maybe not that much, but
If
anyway.
if the tree board is fine with that, I know KCD is fine with that. What we would do tomorrow for next steps is go towards city authorizing this to happen. It's competitive. There are other demands on the KCD money. They're not allocated. They're not decided upon. One example is a rain garden program that was informationally presented at council. And that was for about $130,000, but we're not proceeding yet. There's about $135,000 in the KCD pot right now. This would fit within that. The city administrator and the mayor are informed of that. If the tree board does a motion of support to pursue this tonight, our next step is to sit with administration and say, here we go. It's less than $5,000. Tree board blessed it. Staff wants to do this. Can we call KCD and say, go ahead?
I might also point out that the municipal code says we will do this.
Correct.
And municipal code sort of requires us to do what we're paying for here, or we're almost paying for.
Yeah, but could come under that clause in our municipal
Yeah.
code of periodic assessments analysis.
Precisely.
Larry,
And just to clarify, my understanding is because of this relatively small dollar amount, this would be under the mayor's direct signing authority, so this would not have to go through city council. Is that correct?
Correct.
okay,
But his decision would be based on how we anticipate allocating that $135,000. My offer to him would be, we can do whatever you want with that because this is only a small part of that.
my sense is that Mark would very much like a motion on this. So is there a motion among members to how to proceed with this, with pursuing the grant application or the finalizing the grant?
I would move that based on what we heard tonight, that the tree board endorse moving ahead with the KCD grant as for the 4,400.
Very good. Is there a second? Second there, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right, thanks very much. Kind of a nice night, those two things kind of coming together. Okay. All right, we'll move on to point C in our agenda under item 8, which is future outreach opportunities and farmers market table recap. Victoria, what you want to say on that?
So since our last meeting, beginning of September, we've done 3 outreach tables, one at Picnic in the Park, one at the farmer's market, and then Mark was so kind as to work the Climate Hub opening last Sunday. And they all went really well. Thank you to everyone who worked at them. I think everybody worked at least one table.
Thank you.
I showed up for a few. So picnic in the park was good. It's mostly family oriented, so having the coloring pages, having an interactive opportunity for kids, having candy helped a lot. Yeah. We weren't quite as popular as the photo booth next door, but I think we did well. Mostly talk to adults about recruitment for tree board, a little bit about tree walks. Any other thoughts from picnic in the park? How it went?
I'll just add to what you said, absolutely key to have the stuff to attract the kids. There were a number of times where families would come over because the kids came over, and then the adults, who may not have been wanting to just engage us, directly, just come up and engage us, started conversations because the kids were there, and the kids were drawing and that sort of thing. So I think whatever we can do next year to build on that, having fun things, that would just could bring even more crowd.
Yeah, I would love to get something more creative than the coloring sheets next year, if anyone has ideas.
Well, how
They
about,
were popular, they went over well,
yeah.
but.
You know, one thing outside of the kids coming to the table, a probably very frequent request was recommendations from arborists. And so I did not ever give an official recommendation, but I was like, I have used these people in the past and I really love them. I wonder if the tree board should come up with a list of arborists. Can we even do that?
Arborists have to be licensed to work in Lake Forest Park, so there should be a list of licensed arborists, and we could compile that to provide.
Yeah.
That would be
I
as,
think would love that.
objective as
Yeah.
it be, shouldn't be recommended.
it may be hard to put a stamp on particular ones,
Yeah.
But
If we bring
Having
it
a
as-
list to go from.
Yeah.
Even if we could, I mean, that's a step in the right direction, right? And everybody should be going with an arborist that's been registered with the.
Yeah.
absolutely.
I just made a list of all the arborists that are licensed in Lake Forest Park this week, so
Oh,
we're
good.
set on that.
How many are there?
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity.
It's a lot. I don't know the number for sure, but if they had, the only way you can look it up through the system we have is if it says tree within the name. So if there's a arborist company that doesn't say it,
Yeah.
I could determine if they were something, but if they said like something tree experts, then I could easily be like, okay, this is a tree going through. But I just pulled anybody who had the licensing that had tree in the name and put it on the list, so.
Is
That's what I
there a
got.
list that's going to be like on the website that we could direct people to, or is it something that we could format into a handout or something that we can?
Really, this
disperse?
list was for more of just my personal use, because anyone who uses any arborist services, tree services in the city has to have one of these. So that's something I could work with Mark on and kind of determine if that's something we can make look a little bit more official and put on the website saying like, use one of these are licensed within the city, and go from there.
It sounded like it'd always be a partial list though, because of the tree search parameter.
Yeah, and I reached out to the who provides us with like all the licensing and just kind of asked if there's a way to take what the services they provide and go this route. And that was not possible, so.
Is it required to be a licensed arborist in Lake Forest Park to do any arborist work here, or just to remove trees that are governed by the city ordinance? The latter. So if if I wanted to hire somebody to come in and do a little limbing and cleaning up some things, I wouldn't necessarily need a license, Lake Forest Park license arborist.
Well, the director says anyone doing business in the city of Lake Forest Park needs a business license.
Oh, yeah, okay, there you
A
go.
business license, but doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily.
right, I got it, yeah. That's all encompassing.
But we don't require tree permits for pruning, so it'd be hard to
Yes.
track that.
Not enforceable. but-
Yeah,
So it sounds like for the time being, if we wanted to say, like our urban forest planner has a partial list anyway of those companies that we could refer them to you. They come up in conversation like Victoria was mentioning,
I believe so, I think that'd be okay.
without going the next step of trying to formalize that list. And
Yeah.
publicize it in some way. So we
Exactly.
might want to look into that.
If you have a list that at some point we can turn into a handout and pop into our outreach box, I would be happy to go through and do formatting to make it into something that is reasonable to hand out to the public.
Okay.
We talk about 30 groups or 12 or roughly companies now, not individual but companies.
60 to 70,
Really, no, really not.
yeah. Decent amount, I'd say about. The way I remember it is what letter they started with, and there's about 3 for each letter or so,
Okay,
so yeah.
Okay,
way more than I thought.
how about the farmer's market? That was great. What made it great?
I love partnering with Sarah. Yeah, like putting our tables
Oh,
together.
yeah.
Cause then it was like more than just climate, more than just trees. We sort of worked together to chat with people who were coming over. It's a gorgeous day. Literally gorgeous. Like the happiest day we had weather-wise.
I feel like the morning shift with Stacy and I probably had a very different vibe than the
Yeah.
afternoon shift.
I was gonna say, but then
People seemed super excited about the stuff you brought, so do you want to
Yeah.
talk about what you did?
we learned.
Well,
so
I,
much.
before I left my house, I just went out and cut small branches off of maybe a dozen different native tree species and brought them down and, you know, asked people what they were and then showed them how you tell Douglas fir from a grand fir or a western red cedar from Alaska yellow cedar, the little vine maple from a
The pointy kid.
the pony. That's right. There you go. The buds on Douglas fir. And so that attracted a lot of attention, you know, kids and
That was
adults.
a very nice thing to do. That was really cool. Okay, what about the climate hub? That was a little different event.
That's all you. What about it?
Weren't you there?
It was there for like 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah, well,
It was-
I think I packed up the box and left.
it was just an afterthought to do that because we had done the farmer's market the weekend before and it seemed like it'd be a lift to kind of lay that on the tree board. Anyway, so it was easy enough to do. It was a 2-hour thing. And they just had probably 7 or 8 conversations with people. The real focus, of course, was the climate hub itself and that event. And so, but there were 5 or 6 other groups there, kind of tangentially related to climate. So it was just another opportunity to talk with people. Got to talk to Janelle there. So and a few others. So that was good. Anyway.
Themes I saw from all of them, trying to convince people to join.
Yeah.
I know member recruitment is in our next section, so we could talk about better ways to get the word out on that. We had a couple of promising conversations at various events, but I don't know that anyone actually has followed through on applying.
I think like we could do better at follow-up.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that we could take their phone number.
Right.
We could
having
reach
some
out.
kind of sign up sheet that
Yeah.
we can reach out
Yeah.
and encourage them, yeah. So I think we can talk about that more in new business, but that was a theme of a lot of what we talked about. People seem to still be excited about the tree walks. So continuing to get the rest of those updated. I think we've gone through all the half-page flyers, so before our next event, I'm gonna have you print more half-page flyers for us. Whoever's taking over dealing with our box of stuff. So that's been good to have something that we can direct people to for like, if you like trees, go do this thing, learn more about the trees in your neighborhood. A number of people who are new to the community, or especially at the farmers market, people who don't live in Lake Forest Park, but come here because they like the atmosphere. So guiding people to the tree walks is like, welcome to Lake Forest Park. If you're curious about learning more about and exploring different neighborhoods, they were a really good thing to direct people to. And then lots of questions about, I have this problem tree, what should I do about it? What do I do to get a permit? I just threw away the stack of Drew's cards that were in there. I would love to get a stack of your cards stuck in the box. And when I did do tabling with Drew last spring, it was helpful to have her there. There were lots of questions from people that I could just write. So having at least business cards is super helpful. So a couple of the themes that I saw.
Yeah, I remember the picnic in the park with lots of questions about people worried about trees coming down,
Mhm.
you know, about development and wanting to understand the current areas.
And I think that's where having some kind of resource for, here's a list of arborists that can work in the city. Even when folks are either concerned about trees or concerned about neighbors' trees or things, having something that like, yes, it is, people will often pair that with complaining about our code. And having something that we can say like, yes, our code means you can't just take out the tree willy-nilly, but you do have to keep it healthy. And I'm not saying that you can just ignore the tree. You should actually talk to an arborist and have them make sure the trees are healthy and do maintenance and stuff. So having something that we can actually guide people towards, I think would be helpful in some of those conversations.
Yeah, maybe a little fact sheet. Yeah, but it's because we did get some
Yeah.
over and over.
So the word future is in there too, future outreach.
I feel like we should start talking about Arbor Day, because it's gonna be here soon,
We know the date, is it in April again?
sometime in April.
Oh,
Yeah.
this comes up in April.
Every year, the confusion about whether it's the National Arbor Day or the Washington Arbor Day or
Right,
Lake Forest Park
Somewhere
Arbor Day or
one or the
whatever.
okay.
One thing that I had been emailing with a couple people on the board about, and we didn't end up going forward with yet, but we still have time. Is the Webster DNR nursery down in Olympia that sells saplings. I was down there today picking up some trees and chatted with them. The pre-order window for ordering bags of saplings passed, it was in September. But they said they are out of some species, but have some left, so we could still place an order. I mentioned, she asked what I was looking for, and I was like, I don't know, and also like, it's to give away, so we're not looking for something specific. She's like, oh, well, in that case, let us know, we can sometimes like take leftovers from different orders and do a mixed bag instead, so if you want diversity, we can sometimes do that, no guarantees. You do have to buy in full bags, so it's, I think, 100 to 150 quantity. But they're like $1-ish a piece. They will keep them and ship them anytime like November to April. So when I mentioned that we're looking at doing an Arbor Day, it would be for an Arbor Day event. She's like, oh, perfect, yeah, well, we can ship them to you in April. So if we're interested in that, I would recommend that we try to make a decision sooner rather than later and put in an order. And then we can have a plan lined up for Arbor Day. So that's what I have learned since the last time we talked.
Good. Well, if we pursued that, if, what are these saplings?
Seedlings.
Seedlings.
Sorry.
Seedlings. So if we're thinking about that route, what does that say about the rest of the event? I mean, if we want to incorporate those, what would be the setting that we would create for distributing that? I wonder. I guess that's what it would be
Put
thinking
together
about.
something, the tree walk was super
Tree walk was
engaging last
great.
year.
Yeah.
The education at the farmer's market, it the 10 minutes I was there overlapping with you indicated to me that people were really engaged. So I'm curious if we can put together some kind of educational event that includes giving out seedlings, potentially some kind of education at the event, and then an optional tree walk, something like that.
When does,
If you are willing to still volunteer with us.
I enjoyed it, so I'd be happy to do that.
when does farmers market open? It's like, that's a June, isn't
It's June, you're right, not until June.
it? That's really too late to plant trees.
The Horizon View thing we did. It's really fun and was really well attended, but I think it's just because people kind of ran into it, because people sort of walk there with their dogs and their kids. So doing something up there.
Some of that, but there also seem to be quite a few
Yeah.
people who intentionally went up for it.
Do we know when the art installation?
Having this green fair was like 2 weeks before, and we did a bunch of outreach for the event at Green Fair, which I think helped.
Yeah.
I think doing something like at the Horizon View again, or picking another one of our parks that's near one of the tree walks, or one of the tree walks is like.
One
right
starts
adjacent.
right out here and goes to the sort of the old residential neighborhood to
Okay.
the north and east, or whatever that is. Another one starts over at Starbucks and loops up around through the neighborhood to the south.
So I'm curious, thinking about like where do people wander through, if we could work with Third Place Commons and do like seedling giveaway and education in the commons, and then a tree walk out of there up to the neighborhood next.
Blue Heron Park is right at the start of that tree walk.
Okay,
And I know that the people, there's the Stewardship Foundation, as some people who are working with parks. to rejuvenate that. The plantings at Blue Heron Park.
Sure, she would love to have us.
So we could combine with them in some way.
Yeah.
To, I don't know at what stage they will be. I think they are planning a initial work party to start. Getting rid of the invasive things out of Blue Heron Park. Within the next couple of weeks, and then they're going to. Decide, that was, Blue Heron Park, it was,
They started, I met two of them and they were removing some of the blackberries.
Yeah, okay.
And going through that area.
yeah, so that, the area was set up about 25 years ago as a. Sort of a. Demonstration garden for native plants.
Yeah.
And then, things were planted and let go, and it's just going over. And so they want to get in there and shape it back up, which is great. I think in combination with that, we talked about doing some invasive tree removal, and that's one of my pet projects that I haven't, I've done nothing but spin my wheels on so far, but there's several, at least 3 parks where there are invasive tree species. It would be nice to remove. I think it would be a nice thing to do in conjunction with the tree board, the Parks Board and Parks Department, and the Stewardship Foundation. And see about removing invasives and planting natives in their place.
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's getting a little,
Okay.
another topic there, right? But,
Yep.
yeah, so what I heard us saying is we would like to incorporate those trees. and-
For Arbor Day.
For Arbor
We
Day,
don't have to figure out all the details now, but if we do think we want to do a seedling giveaway. I would love if somebody wants to partner with me and help inform the what should we buy, I am happy to do the ordering. I'm not the expert on the details
I think we
there.
both gave you comments on this, didn't we?
Yeah, we did have some,
There
just
was
some
some talking
quick
ourselves in
discussion about
circles.
what was available, but if you could recheck, find out what's available. Before the November meeting, which is not that far away, right? Cause we're already.
3 weeks, probably 2 weeks away.
Maybe that would be a time where we could make some decisions.
Happy to.
Was there a cost?
There is a cost, they're about $1 each, so either we can look at whether that's a cost that we can expense to the tree fund, or I would be happy to donate the cost of a bag of trees. I don't know what other supplies we might want to need for that.
When we did that last time, we used tree fund money. And we got 200 Douglas fir seeds,
Yeah.
something like that, and gave most of them away.
Yeah.
And,
Okay, I went back to it. And I was just reminded by Janelle that it might also be in conjunction with the climate hub, that there's something going on inside of the commons that
The
might.
Green Fair is right around that time as well.
That's right.
And
That's
was
right.
it
We
good,
can find that out.
recruiting, I was
Yeah.
just saying, I think part of the traction that we got for our event was that we handed out a bunch of flyers for it at the Green Fair.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyway, that climate hub might be a way to advertise it too.
Yes.
Andy.
Larry, yes,
So I looked it up. Arbor Day in Washington is the second Wednesday in April. So next year it'll be April 8th. And I think what you've usually done is either the weekend before or the weekend after to make it easier for people to attend.
Great.
Can you put that on your calendars?
Which version is that, Larry?
That's the Washington State
Washington
version.
And then for other future stuff, tabling at the farmers market was really fun. Climate Action Committee, by the time we reached out last year, all of the tables have been claimed for this year. So I am happy if we want to try to claim a table for next year, or I can ask Climate Action Committee if they want to share a table. I don't know how early we need to get on the radar there, but I can reach out to the market organizers and find out how early we have to get on the radar to try to claim a spot next year, if folks are interested.
I think that's a good idea. I'll pursue that.
I
Thank
can
you.
find out the timeline on how to get on their schedule.
Last year's Green Fair was March 29th, so preceded the Arbor Day. I was thinking that we could. If it came after, we could use the Green Fair to give away trees, the rest of the trees. We had a bunch of leftover trees last time.
And we could just get the trees earlier and get.
Yeah,
the
we could
trees
just
at
do it
Green
at both
Fair.
of those events, because there's probably different people that come to those two events.
It might be better to order fewer trees.
Well, the minimum is
150.
150 or something like that. It's hard to give away that many trees. Turns out.
Well, good. So we got some things to think about over the next couple of weeks. We'll come back. This will be on our agenda for
We'll move
for
forward
our
with
next
this.
meeting. Yep. Anything else, Victoria or others?
Stacy, the installation for the bench is October 25th. You asked earlier.
Yes.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Oh, I was like, wait, did I ask? I was ask about that.
Elizabeth, I'm sorry, I missed that. What was it?
The installation for the bench at the Horizon View Park.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, October 25th.
Good. Very good. Okay, well, we're ready to move on. We got one more topic we want to be sure to talk about, two more topics, but we want to take a look, we decided we wanted to take a look at our work plan. Kind of midway through this program year or wherever we are in it, about that. I guess, I don't, questions, I think it would be good to talk about what we're doing well. What we're avoiding or what we're not doing, where we need to take another look at those two kind of categories. So, what struck you as you looked at this material in terms of yeah, we're doing well.
Public outreach.
Pardon me?
Public outreach.
Public outreach.
Everything we just talked about.
All of that stuff we talked about, which is, well, there's Arbor Day broken out, and then one of those. So the bold ones were the ones that we wanted to emphasize as being sure we hit those items.
I haven't actually looked at it. Have we updated the LFP web content?
No,
Oh, yeah, I did do some updates to the website.
you did?
Yeah,
Well, you should tell us. We'll go and look.
do you guys wanna look at it? I think. What I just did was kind of organize it a little bit better. Some of the links didn't work.
I'm a little amused that the first picture that popped up was Ken Moore.
We love our neighbors.
Oh, there we are.
So yeah, updated the members, added the community forestry management plan, tree walks. Updated all the work plans on here. Updated the link for the agendas that used to lead you nowhere before. Updated the Zoom link and yeah, just move some things around so it's easier to read.
By the way, we have 2 Victorias now on the member list.
Oh yeah, so I should update it again.
She does a lot of work.
Keep updating. So can we, if I search in the search field on the home page, will I get to that page, tree board page? That would be nice to do.
Said like, I'm looking for.
I'm looking for it. But
Top right.
Here,
yeah,
should be there.
wow. That's okay. Well, that's two steps to get there, but that's okay.
Yep. That takes you to all the agendas.
That's a big improvement because when I first joined, it was tough to navigate around and try to pass the checklists.
Yeah, so fix the links, move some stuff around.
Can you go back to the homepage again?
Yep.
One of my dreams has always been to have it linked to one of those buttons at the bottom. So instead of having parks, have parks and forests,
Here,
but one, you know. They have a button at the bottom that says, has something about trees on it.
I feel like that might be a little niche for the reason that most people go to the website.
yeah,
Most of the reason I go to the website. But I might be an outlier.
Yeah, I'll have to talk to probably Jessica, cause then I'm assuming each board is probably gonna wanna be down here too.
Also, so I think maybe we could have parks and forests or something like that. That
Oh.
one button is for parks.
There's a parks one. here.
Yeah, cross
On
that out,
the-
it'd be parks and forests.
You see the side, yeah, to the side, more the side.
But that takes us to our
It's
parks.
down there. Oh, that's the parks.
Yeah,
There's also, oh.
Does the city have any forests that are not already parks?
Well, the watershed,
And all the forests, I mean, our city forest.
So I guess my question is, where would a forest button at the bottom of that page take you in your vision?
Well, we used to have.
Like what page would it take you? to?
I don't know what pages there are, there used to be a page that had led to a lot of the forestry stuff, for example, the canopy maps, the tree board, tree list. That, at one point, there was a page that wasn't too bad, it was just really hard to find. In terms of tree information, now I'm not sure if that page still exists.
Well, listen, we didn't want to delve in too deeply to figure this out tonight. We're trying to get a sense of how we're doing on the on our work plan. So that's good to know that there's some stuff being done on that, Elizabeth, and it sounds like maybe that we have some other thoughts kicking around too, that maybe.
I think what Doug just said, kind of summarized what I was thinking, which was, just, yes, there's our site, but in general, when you're going to find information about trees, it's
Yeah.
easy to find.
Yeah.
This point.
Which may be through the tree board page or maybe independent of that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think when someone's going to search for trees on the city website, they're probably thinking about, okay, you want to take down a tree or something like that, not necessarily, can I join the tree board?
I hear you. Okay. All right. Well, let's hold that for now, folks. I want to see what other thoughts you have on this. The other things that we're doing well. That on the second page. That first bold item under advise the mayor and council, I think that's where we're talking about the assess the results of pre-inventory study. I don't know, I was thinking of the KCD work that's coming up that we've been laying groundwork for. It seemed to fit in there. Maybe it fits in other places as well, but continuing to make some progress along those lines.
There's a couple things in section 1 in public outreach. We have developing content to improve public outreach, and we also have general invasive plant management, including education opportunities. Before, I doubt that we'll have much outreach and event stuff until we reach March, April, the events we've already talked about. But by the time we get there, I would love to have some information of some invasives information. Right now, our outreach box is a bunch of random brochures that are just like legacy items that are left behind from
Right.
former tree board folks. And then the one brochure that we developed last year. So if we have more informational things or new things or things that are better targeted to our community or particularly things that we want on people's radar, like invasives removal. I would love to work on getting that updated. I am not the expert in content for any of those, but if anyone has content that they think would be helpful, I'm happy to put together materials.
Good. On that same action item, it does seem to me we're kind of missing the boat a little bit on articles that we could be producing.
Yeah, I was gonna mention.
We've got.
I had promised to do something on holly last winter, and Christmas might be a good time to do that
Right.
coming up. You know, that you're probably aware that holly was made a state noxious weed in last March or sometime.
Yeah.
And it would be a way to promote that as, get the community to be aware that they shouldn't be planting holly, they should in fact be removing it, so on.
Ollie, dig it up and put it on your mantle.
Sounds like kind of a Scrooge angle.
It is, that's a little bit, but, you know, 'tis the season
That'd
to
be
use
good.
holly.
I think another tree diseases, I think I was hoping to work on one myself, on the one that affects the Douglas firs more. We did that one on birch trees. But I think just articles in general, and you had some other thoughts too, you were talking about.
do, I have
natural
sort of a
history,
list.
Kind of things that
Thanks.
might be cool, but I don't want to detract either from your time to finish that fourth tree walk. That would be a great way to finish your term on the tree board. It could be to see if that could happen. Anyway,
Or
in,
not finish it. Or-
Is that gonna continue on you?
what else? Anything, any other thoughts? Just how we doing on this? That very last box on the last page gets ticked off altogether, huh? We help contribute to the climate element for the comp plan. Okay. I heard maybe some, go ahead, Victoria.
So I she called my attention to the bottom, and I started reading up from it. Compiled tree permit data. Would love to, we don't have to revisit it in detail now, but it's something we've discussed, and it sounded like the new permitting system will let us get better data on permits to be able to see. It sounds like previously the tree board got monthly reports on tree permits that had been submitted. Am I correct about that?
Yes.
Back in the day?
Yeah.
And that the new system may allow that to be done more easily,
May or may not.
maybe.
We're still trying to work it out.
Okay. I'll toss it on your radar, that is something that at least I would love to see if there is some way for us to easily get here's what report, what has been submitted and what's been approved over the last month, so we can start looking at trends and what's going on.
One of the problems with the reports we've had before was it was so early in the for most of the trees, many of them were so early in the permitting process, we had no idea what's gonna happen. Somebody had submitted a permit request. But nobody had time to act on it yet, but maybe we should do it for the previous month.
Having year to date, I mean, I would suggest whatever we have is year to date data.
It would be
gets
good
updated monthly.
instead of trying to get. This month is unusual, of course, instead of trying to get September data for the October meeting, maybe have August data. But then it's actually
Cover
pretty
is
finished.
relevant, but
What
yeah.
is our purpose in having that information in front of us? I mean,
It seemed to me to be a way that the tree board stayed abreast of the on the ground implementation of the tree ordinance,
Yeah.
which we're in part responsible for advising the council on. And the format that we used to get it in, for your benefit, was simply an Excel spreadsheet, which had one column was, the address where the property was, and then whether it was a major or minor permit, how many trees were and what size were proposed to be removed, what the species were, if known. It was sort of just a summary, line by line. We could go down and say, okay, there's 12 permit requests in the last month. They, in aggregate, were gonna result in, 24 tree removals, and 2 of them would be over a certain size, that would put them into a certain category and whatever.
Yeah.
And it was just, it really helped us keep abreast. You saw them, right? You were on this.
Yeah, I've done that one.
There's 2 things I can see that being helpful for. One is, as we're discussing things like exceptional tree sizes, knowing like how many of our permits are we talking about that are major versus minor? How are we talking about 1 a month or 10 a month? Some of that, and in tabling and outreach, we have a lot of folks who are either grumpy that they can't take out a tree, or grumpy that they see trees being cut down all the time, or why is it so easy for people to take out their trees here, they should have to keep them more. So having some context for like, cool, only 24 trees have been approved to be taken out in the last 2 months, like having some of that data to be able, as we're talking to the community about our tree code and policy, I think would be helpful context. And I really like numbers. I just want more Excel.
I have found, that I what I fear is that there's sometimes a sense of alarm that comes with that report when you see it there, and because it's a little bit out of context. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Dave, and I think I would like to see what we could do to maybe continue producing that kind of a report, but I think it can be alarmist in some sense to look at it. And so I was trying to balance that in my mind with, what we know about from our canopy analysis and our tree inventory, how we're doing at the macro level, along with you know, kind of this input of.
I think you will be right, if we do the GIS stuff, we'll be having both the kind of on the ground, monthly data, and we'll have the overall, what's the canopy really doing? Yeah, where are we losing canopy?
Ideally, it's also the kind of data that we can look at over time. And that it would be year-to-date data matched with previous years, so we can see like, okay, I keep hearing it, people at the farmer's market keep complaining that all the lots around them are being developed and every tree is being taken out. Cool, except permits are actually down from last year. Or like, this is the trends we're seeing in permitting and removals, having that as we're talking with the community, that three things would be helpful.
Well,
I think the problem I see, what would be nice to put in their report is a reminder that there are 290,000 trees on Lake Forest Park. You know, you like put in each thing, you know, there are 290,000 trees in Lake Forest Park. 289,954 of them are still growing, and they're all growing.
And some that were 5 3/4 inches diameter now, at least the size that they're
That's right, there's,
countable.
but and I agree with you, it's got an alarmist feel to it, but the numbers have to be put in context, and then the same thing.
I think this is the space to put them in context and have it as a conversation, so it's not one numbers though.
right. Well, I think, you know, what we're asking, Sam, is if you could get into this, take a look at it and see what it would take to produce something that you, without, you know, counting up whole big chunks of your time to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, is if this is pulling too much of the time, and then it's just something that's not feasible. But if it's something a little quicker, it's something we can look into.
Well, find out just ways that if there's ways to compile data as you issue permits or whatever, a running tab that you keep or something, I don't know.
Well,
It sounds like way too much work.
Yeah.
My hope was that with the new system you were talking about last time, if there is a
Oh.
way to once a month go in and pull a standard
We're
Excel.
doing
template.
like weekly meetings with our support team, because we're
Yeah.
still in the setup phase.
Oh, yeah.
With
So-
the new permit
Oh, yeah.
system.
Whenever all of the dust
Yeah.
settles there, put it on your radar.
So
that
that's something we
It
could
would be
talk
lovely
to
to.
support.
Am I correct that those permits are public record? So it would be nice to have it in some way that it can be pulled and summarized.
And it would also be kind of nice to see. Permit applied for, how many trees were actually taken out. I think probably very few people realize, maybe I'm wrong, that the arborist ends up. Cutting back a lot of, for the major projects, ends up saying, no, you can take these, but you gotta leave these, things like that. And so I think might be useful for people to see that, yes,
They
Not
applied
every
to take
applicant.
out 10, they were approved to take out 5.
right, and I'd like to have some information saying that, no, not everybody who wants to take out a tree gets to it.
And to be clear, we're not asking for analysis, right? We're just asking for the
Yep.
data.
Just the raw negotiation.
Yeah.
So,
It
Sam,
is easy
you
to
you
get,
take a look
but-
at that.
Yeah.
What
If
makes
it's worth
sense.
like 10 claims.
But if I went in to Elizabeth's office as public resident of Lake Forest Park and said, I want to see tree permit removal data for 2024, I could file a public information request, right? And you would have to be able to provide that.
No, that'd be a request for services. If you wanted permit number 2024X, that's a public records request.
I see.
Oh, well,
If you
I
want
guess,
us to compile and tabulate and calculate a number, that's a service request. And we are very light on budget.
now, so somebody asked us the other day at one of these events, I think it was at Climate Hub, I don't know if it was, but. They asked about a particular address, and was there a permit for the tree removal that was going on there?
Yeah, that I would consider just community outreach. Someone has a question, we go online, we verify. That helps us. I call it eyes on the community.
So how does that work? What would we recommend to them, that they contact Sam or contact somebody at City Hall to track that down? I mean, ideally, there would be a permit posted. But
Exactly. Yeah.
sometimes that doesn't happen.
It depends on the urgency. If it's Friday afternoon and a chainsaw is running, get a human being from City Hall out there. If it's not urgent and I'm just curious and I want to verify, so for my own comfort level, send an email, we'll get it to Sam or somebody that can just log into permit tracking and get back to them.
Okay, Great. All right, anything else we want to mention about this? I think it's good to check in on this. Yes.
So may I just briefly swing back to writing the article about Holly?
Yeah.
So the online newsletter is once a month. It's put out around the last week of each month. So I think it's probably too short of turnaround for the October. End of December isn't gonna work. So you got one shot and it's gonna be around Thanksgiving. So you probably want to get in touch with Jessica. I think it's Jessica who files the newsletter. Is that right?
I think it's Zoe.
Oh, so, yeah, get in touch to see what is the internal deadline to get an article to them.
Good. All right. Well, thank you. All right, let's, we have one other thing we want to talk about tonight. That is any thoughts we have or having about, recruitment. We have one vacancy right now. We're likely to have two more vacancies, by what is February or so, two.
One more, two total.
Well, we have one vacancy now.
Oh, two,
And-
oh, two.
And
Both of you, I think, are
No, I
rotating up.
no,
Think my sentence runs for another year.
that's what time.
Unless I
You can't get rid of
unless I can get
that.
early parole.
No, I don't think so. We need, it's nice to have somebody with the academic credentials among us. So, we have met a few people, a couple of people that were interested. There was a person who was here at our last regular meeting, Esther. What's her name? Oh, sorry, she's not here again. Whole thing. You ever, Elizabeth, you know if you ever followed through it all?
I haven't done anything. So usually if someone applies, the city clerk will let me know, and he hasn't told me anything.
We don't have any of
She had,
them.
she seemed interested in.
Not that I know of.
I think we need to change our tactic from, that's great, do this, to indicate your interest, to, let me take your name and number.
Yeah, yeah.
Reach out to you with the link.
Yeah.
And I'll follow up with you afterwards, otherwise, I don't think anyone's gonna join.
I think that's a very good idea. Be a little more progressive or proactive.
They've
Yeah,
got rid
and
email.
Dick was really proactive with me, he sent me an email. That's exactly.
Pass it on. And I buttonholed Mark at one of our Arbor Day events.
I think making it part of our outreach, so when we do,
Yeah,
our events and just make it one of the things we do, just like candy things for kids. It's like, we make sure we have something that can engage people in a not formal way, but I mean in a way that's serious. It's like, hey, you want to be on the tree board? Well, here's what they do. Here's what your qualifications need to be, etc.
So Janelle and I talked briefly about that, about her possibly joining the tree board. And I think our rule is you have to be a resident of Lake Forest Park, or I think the owner of a business that's situated in Lake Forest Park. And either one of those categories felt applied, I guess.
There's also an exception for folks with expertise in the
Yeah,
field as
someone-
well.
Yeah. Anyway, so
Maybe Mark Hoffman could give some feedback from the other committee, like Planning Commission, Parks Board. What have they done to garner interest? And might that apply to tree board?
The city clerk has at various cycles or times sent out e-blasts, recruitments. In November, we're due again. So for me, Planning Commission, I have a couple candidates. I told them they don't have to wait, please apply. Schedule a time where we can meet or talk. I can go over, the requirements, the workload, the expectations, and make sure that you want to do this. Once they apply, then that's upstairs at City Hall. My hope is that we have multiple candidates for each vacancy on all boards. So in November, I'm going to look at Planning Commission and then frame a recommendation or a general feeling from staff to the mayor. Mayor nominates, and then those are brought to City Council for confirmation. So for tree board, if you want to aim for those that are interested to talk with us or talk with Sam in October and then officially apply, they would be ready for November.
I suppose my question was more along the lines of, is there some sort of outreach that the planning commission has been actively doing, or the parks board has been actively doing, that the tree board could emulate?
Not as a group, but as individuals, yes, they're out in the community. They are members of the community. And if they run into an interested person that they feel could be a benefit to the city, and I'll just speak for planning commission. Planning commissioners are welcome to speak to them and then point them in my direction or city clerk. So if the tree board individually wants to do that, that's fine. But I wouldn't go so far as the tree board as a group should do that, because you need to do that work in a meeting just like this one.
We talked a few months ago about this. I found that pretty much everybody in the board had been individually recruited by somebody who was on the board, right? And I was recruited by Tyson Greer, and I don't know who recruited you, but each one of us,
Julia Vett.
yeah, each one of us sort of traced a lineage back to a former member who talked us into joining.
Yeah, I think we should take a part of our strategy should be that we each personally take the task of contacting 2 to 3 people about being on tree board. It would be nice to have, I'm sure we have something, that could be tree board, what do you do, what's your commitment, all that kind of thing, but.
People I know that I know are also interested in trees.
Right, or just interested in getting involved in the community, I mean.
Well, I think that's a good idea. That sounds like something we can pursue. It did, now there's like we mentioned the city's newsletter. I know the mayor has put in plugs for volunteers from time to time. Maybe we should ask him to do that again, or maybe you're doing that, Mark, in terms of,
That's exactly what's happening in November.
uh,
And when they do it, they don't like to do it for individual vacancies or individual committees or commissions. It will be across the board. If you're interested in these, please contact us. So I anticipate after the election, mid-November, that will go out, but we don't need to wait. If you have knowledge of interested parties, please do go talk with them.
I've been telling people, well, if they were interested, when I thought they were interested, to download the application off the website. And then I guess take that upstairs.
Yeah, email it in. I think it's a fillable form. That's the official step. I always like to offer a conversation or a meeting to talk about duties, roles, workload, how often they meet, what is your interest, what's your background.
Sure.
I don't make the decision based on background, but I know that we want a representative border commission and different perspectives. And so that's that initial conversation. You could have that with a few potential candidate. You can go ahead.
I wondered too about something like the Shoreline Area News. Somebody wanted to put very short article in there about summary of tree board activity and that there are vacancies and how to apply. Any reason that wouldn't be another way to go? I mean, that would be specific to the tree board, and it would be maybe written by a tree board member or something like that.
I don't do that.
Is there any reason that we could not do that though, that you know of?
I don't know. It's more of an opinion piece letter. I'm not that familiar with the Shoreline News. It's not a newspaper. I call it a blog. So in that context, you sure?
I don't even know what the readership number is in Lake Forest Park or the unit.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be one of the ways that broader community outreach that we have available to us. I guess it's not as comprehensive as the newsletter, the city's publication. But.
Yeah, that's our tool and the website. But at some point, if it's extensive and even though it's a blog or a comment, or if they call it a news story, then the branding and words and so forth become a city issue. That's why I stick to city clerk and their tools.
I learned on Sunday at the Climate Hub. Ribbon cutting, that the Climate Act Committee has a student member.
Yeah.
Is there anything to prevent us from using one of the board members as a student member?
I think the answer is no to that, unless
Someone?
somebody's more familiar with with what it says in the.
There's two versions of that. There's one that's like, you could say, let's go to Shortcrest High School and advertise to them to try to get someone. What the climate committee did was they basically reserved it came two, but initially one of their seats could only be filled by a student. So which of those options are you thinking of?
I wasn't really thinking of it in that level of detail, but that's a good question. You know, we have, as long as I've been on the board, we haven't had a full complement of board members, right? 7 is what the charter says. And you know, I was impressed to see the students there on Sunday who were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and eager to engage. And
I mean, I wonder if initially the better approach might just be go to Shortcrest and see, do they have an environmental club, and reach out to them just to sort of see, can you get general interest? Because a student could definitely be appointed to any of the seats on the tree board.
And I think that was our basic question. Is there any reason why we couldn't have a high school student be a member? And I
Would it have to be a high school student, I mean, college student?
Sure,
grad
yeah,
student?
sure.
I mean, if it's just a normal board member, we're just looking to recruit a student, it could be any of those.
Well, I mean, if it was somebody in biology or forestry, they might qualify under the special expertise.
Yes.
Yeah. And I have that if you want to share screen. The difference between CAC and the tree board is the tree board's codified. Just like planning commission. CAC is a temporary task force. I don't know that I have share screen, but I'm going to try and see if you can see that.
Terms are generally 3 years, although some people truncate their terms shorter, and students may not have a 3-year commitment timeline, but.
Yeah, right.
So it's 7 and 2, and it's section B, and I think it's pretty flexible. If you can see that.
You know, I really,
They add up to one additional members who don't reside, but they wouldn't be. If we don't have 7, not sure how the second sentence works. Second sentence under number 2, which I can just barely read. I'm not sure how that works if we don't have 7 members.
I mean, I assume it just means that it would move the benchmark from 7 to 9 if 2 of them didn't reside in the city.
Yeah.
Okay, so we could have up to 2 anyway.
Yes.
well, okay, so the gist of it is that there's no reason why we couldn't have a high school student or a college student. The basic requirements be the same unless, as Doug said, that there was a qualification of expertise, somebody who was studying the field and would like to contribute this way.
Mark, I saw something in that code you had up. I had always thought of 7 as the limit, but it says shall have no less than 7 members.
Yeah. All that.
Which means
Like,
that,
we've been doing everything illegally.
No, you have vacancies. Yeah, it's just wording. It's a 7-member board. You could have 2 more that don't reside in the city that have an expertise, but you can also operate with 5 or 6, which is the current situation.
we've been doing, yes, okay. Well, I like Doug's idea, though. Maybe we could find somebody who is a student, say at UW in forestry or urban planning or biology or something, who might be interested in trees and urban environments.
Do either of you have connections there that would like to work for
You know,
recruiting?
there was a grad student at the Climate Hub who's doing a PhD in the urban planning department. Forgot what her name was.
Was that the person who was talking to you at the farmer's market? Who
No,
was working the booth next door?
no, this is somebody who actually has a formal relationship with the Climate Hub, Climate Committee. And she is going to be doing some,
Maybe it's one of those
or
scientists
something with,
that Sarah was mentioning in her public comments. I think one of them is a graduate school. so-
no, maybe. But she's in a program that specifically is about urban planning and nature. I mean, I've forgotten exactly what it was called, but something like.
My question remains of, do either of the two of you who are or were connected, you'd have current connections, or instead of poaching from our other city boards?
I don't, at this point, can't think of anybody.
And I retired 13 years ago, so it's a little bit hard to. That's, it's not something that's ruled out. Every so often I go to apartment picnics. And I might be able to find somebody who says, you know any students who might be interested in learning something about how tree policy works. Or want to use their tree expertise to make the world a slightly better place.
Or maybe Sarah could talk to one of those scientists. See if they had any idea.
Oh, maybe so, yeah, yeah.
I remember the young woman who's got up in front, spoke for.
Oh, yeah, towards the end, I think she was
Yeah.
the last speaker, right?
Yeah.
And I think, well, I'll find out who that was, but I do think it's important too, for a person like that to understand that we get into some fairly nitty gritty local stuff. And it's not all glory, and being on the tree board, right? And so we'd want people who understood the full scope of the work we do and willing to
It
participate.
might be attractive to some
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think somebody who has some interest in urban planning and environment. That right up our alley.
Yeah.
May not be the same sort of expertise that Doug and I have, but in some ways it's even more interesting for them.
Okay, well, it sounds good. I think it's good to kind of stir up the ground a little bit like this, and I think the concrete suggestion from Richard that we each think of a person or two that we would want to, that we could personally approach. I'm not tree board.
Put that down as an action item for myself.
Something we do.
I've already got two. I have already recruited.
Oh, that was then. This isn't.
Yeah, this is usually like.
And you don't have much time, man.
Anybody rotating off city council?
This election's over.
We'll find out.
Wanted.
Okay, I think we've probably done with that topic. If there's any other thoughts, but I think let's just talk for a minute. What do we got for we will be meeting in 2 weeks, right? It's must be the 5th of November. It's our next tree board meeting, 2 weeks, 5th of November.
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
So what we talked about a moment ago, the planning for the Arbor Day and painting trees. One.
Yep. that's right.
We'll try to have updates on things about market table and Arbor Day.
Okay.
Seedlings. I had a couple other things on my radar that weren't on the agenda for tonight. One is the water district stuff going on there. We had a lovely tour of the water district well field today. Would love at the next meeting, I can send around the they just updated their forest management plan for their 12-acre well field. I would love for us to get a chance to take a look at it and see if there's anything interesting there.
Good.
I got a copy of it from their staff this week, so I'll send it around to the board.
I thought I had the sense too from that email that they were gonna make it available, the link to all our board members, or that's what you would share. with
Yeah, I
us.
have a digital copy.
Okay. Okay.
It sounds like it is in technically still draft form, but it is.
Yeah.
Mostly finished draft. From chatting with the folks there, it sounds like they are also looking at potentially next doing a urban forest fire management plan. There's some other local jurisdiction they were talking to that has one. So will be interesting, I think, to see what they continue to do in putting together plans and proposals for their property and see if there's anything we've learned from them or steal from them for our work. So I'll send that around and I would love to discuss it at the next meeting.
In regard to fire, the thing that I picked up most clearly was that their biggest worry is a fire. Fire that you had existing part of Lake Forest Park and would put a huge drain on their, their pumping system.
Yeah.
We heard that they do have backup from Seattle, city of Seattle. But nevertheless, that's the one thing that kept coming up, well, you know, we have this capacity and in the event of a fire, we can have this much capacity, but we only have this much capacity for it. That was just
Yeah.
surprised how often that came up.
Our tour was mostly focused on the well infrastructure. If their staff has also offered in the past to do a tour of their well field for the tree board. So if we are interested in that,
The whole drainage, that's what you're referring to, say the well field?
they've got 12 acres over down below Horizon View.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've walked all through that many times before I realized it was supposed to be closed to public.
Yeah, and there's parts of it that are like fully fenced and like closed to the
Yeah.
public. But if we are interested in seeing it's a beautifully forested,
Yeah,
big chunk of undeveloped Lake Forest Park. So if that's something we're interested in,
continuously floored with,
the staff have been doing an awesome job.
have
of
they?
that in some places. I'm not gonna say they've done the whole 12 acres, but anyway, I would love to put that on the agenda for the next meeting to chat about what is going on over with those guys.
You got something else you're thinking of?
There's two other things that came up briefly at the Climate Hub event that I was gonna put on the radar for whether it needs a follow-up and a conversation at the next meeting or not, I'm not sure. One was, I got a question from someone about whether our tree code prevents a Miyawaki forest, like they have in Shoreline, from being planted here. I saw your face twitch when I said that word. I don't know the code well enough or the framework of what those forests are to know whether there is any conflict there.
shoreline.
But it is something that was brought to my attention that there are folks who would be interested in being able to do that and seem to think that our code prevents it. So I'm curious what that would be.
I think we can pursue that with Sam and the
Get more
code
information.
itself. I don't know that we need to talk about it.
But I can't think of anything. If you wanna plant trees, nobody.
Yeah.
Has any jurisdiction, or if you wanna plant a Miyawaki forest to replace a
Yeah.
bunch of trees, then it'd be a different issue.
So,
That's
like I said, something that we can look into and see whether it's actually an issue or not. And then also got a question about the trees proposed to be removed as part of the ST3 bus lane work. And folks asking whether there's an inventory of what trees will be removed, if any of them are invasives that should be getting removed anyway, and how many of them are under 6 inches anyway. And wouldn't require a permit for removal. And I was like, I have no idea if we have that data, but I can ask the board. So that's something that I guess is more a question for you, Mark, if that is information or data that we have. And if it is something that the tree board could be helpful in looking into to get more context and information for, I know there's a lot of community feelings and discussion around the removal of those trees. And helping to put context to the removal of those trees. Just wanted to bring it up, if it's something that we could be helpful in, community education or information on.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, the easy answer is yes, but it's a question of timing. Through a series of public records requests, the information absolutely exists. Sound Transit calls it their 100% design. We will be sitting as decision makers when they submit. They have not submitted. We anticipate next spring they will. It's a series of ministerial permits, so I'm staying clean. They're in acquisitions. What we determined, I guess it's going on a year now, is you can't submit permits for property you don't have control or ownership over. So that's where we're at. And the only way to keep the optics clean or claim I played no role is to play no role. So the moment they officially submit, we will have that exact information. And I would love to be asked that question at that moment. So, anecdotally, yeah, there are a lot of trees. So if the number is 400, what do they consist of? We've heard a lot of it, but I personally would avoid talking about it until that moment I have an active application and then proceed.
Okay,
And sorry, to be fair, I wanna be clear that this is a topic that either we can discuss now in the remaining 7 minutes of this meeting. Or if it is something we want to have a lengthier discussion on and figure out if there is anything the board can do, it can be put on for agenda for next week.
The other side of that coin is the replanting. And so it's very likely that Sound Transit will partner with KCD to develop a replanting plan. And then that plan would get submitted to city staff that would look over, how many trees, what species, where. I would imagine there'll be an opportunity for the tree board to assist in those conversations also. But it's very premature because, again, nothing has officially been submitted.
so I wonder if we should put that on, we can put it on as a holding category on our agenda and talk about it again. I don't know that we'd have any more information to discuss at that
I
point.
wonder, would it be better on the 26 work plan?
Well, probably if all that is really a few months down, at least a few months down the road.
At least a few months, yeah.
You know, I mean, there's really very little we can do until Mark says we have the numbers.
Okay,
We can talk about it, we can say, well, they're taking out a lot of trees and some of them are big, but
I guess my question is, are we bound by the same? Not bound. Should we be sticking to the same policy that you have, or as a tree board or individual tree board members? Can we be looking at things that haven't crossed your desk yet, but are published to be able, so why this comes up for me is, as we're talking to the community, can we be helping to educate the community about things? Even if it is not coming from you, but coming from us? Or should,
Not as a
Follow
city
it.
board, right? Not as a tree board.
Okay.
And I can't grant permission because it's not a city decision. But I can use an example, that core group that has given presentations to city council, has a website and so forth, has submitted a series of public records requests to Sound Transit, and I believe they have this information. But they are not a tree board, city commission, city sponsored. And so that would be the dividing factor.
yeah, and they spoke to us too once. They came to our tree board meeting, the representative and briefed us on what they knew. But maybe you want to research that with the core people, and we got a couple contacts there, and just see if they have the kind
as
of
long as I am
information.
not overstepping my bound.
Well, I don't know that we didn't have doing anything about it, but it might be that we can share this information.
Yeah.
I'd be
The tree board will not sit in the capacity of a decision maker at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's different from my role.
You want to see if the core has anything, let me,
I've got quite a few other to-dos in the next 3 weeks, so I'm not gonna promise.
well, let's hold it
to
for
reach out to
future
them
discussion.
next
You
week.
might pick it up. I had one other item that I was hoping, and I don't know if your time allows you to do this, but we talked about those, the KCD grant, and we talked about those 3 custom parcels, all of which we have a GIS foundation that we need to figure out. What I was gonna see is if it's possible, if you could start looking into that. In terms
All
of,
3 of them are selected from the GIS data sets linked on the Lake Forest Park website.
yeah, to see where that data might come from. Do we already have it and it's like embedded in the maps that we have on our website? Is it?
It's in the searchable list of GIS data sets. So we have GIS data set on the website.
We have it, they're shape files, they're on the city drive. What we need is somebody that has the expertise to access them legally and not mess them up.
And it's the data that company needs that's gonna do the work, the GeoPlanet IT.
Yes.
Okay, well, if then that's a non-issue. We have it for parcels, we have it for our wetlands, and we have it for our zones. Our
Yeah.
land zones.
And so we need a person or a qualified entity that we would give access of these shape files to do a specific thing. We currently do not have a staff member that does that.
Okay, well, I guess we're gonna have to figure out how that data gets transmitted.
Yeah.
Transferred to the GeoPlanet people to do the analysis did. I was not on the impression that we had it. I thought some of those maps are just drawings on paper.
No. Yeah, they are not a single PDF. They are an interactive map made up of sometimes 100 shape files. The zoning map being the example, we have that data. And Drew had that specific expertise that, but it generates questions like, do we have an Esri license? Who has that? And we have a very small access through AWC, or we're a member of some group that provides a limited amount of hours for that. My intent is to identify that and ask if we can grab onto that, but it's been dedicated to public works, so it's not under my purview.
Would it be a fair agenda item to say we'd like to just discuss what the next steps are in that project? At our
Yeah.
next meeting? I mean, that is only 2 weeks, so I don't know if that's feasible or not, but to at least start to sort through some of these questions you're raising and understand how we make that link with KCD to pursue those three.
Yes, yeah, by November 5th. It actually empowers me because when we amended our zoning map for middle housing, I asked that very same question, and the person that I think would do this work never emailed me back. So now with this request, place it on the November 5th agenda, I'm empowered to go search for it.
Okay, well, let's include that then. Those are 3 items then, and I noted the outreach, the water district, and the next steps with KCD. Is there anything else that we'd like? There may be more that will emerge in the
And I
next
think
few days.
recruitment should stay on our list, Mark.
Sorry, Rich,
Recruitment should stay on our list.
keep recruitment on the list. Everybody bring a new person to the next meeting.
I think that's a great ask, because everybody do their outreach.
Okay, well, that's good to keep in front of us. Any other business you want to pursue tonight? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Is there a second, I wonder?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. I think we were adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Elizabeth,
why-
do you have a preference
reaction
for
to
the